Whitman remembered his body as other poets of his time remembered English verse. Out of his own body and its relation to itself and the sea, he drew his basic rhythms. They are not the rhythms, as has been asserted, of work and lovemaking, but rather the relation of our breathing to our heartbeat, and these measured against an ideal of water at the shore, not beginning or ending, but endlessly drawing in, making forever its forms of massing and falling among the breakers, seething in the white recessions of its surf, never finishing, always making a meeting place. Not out of English prosody, but the fluids of organism, not so much from the feet of the foot beat, except they too derive from the rhythms of pulse and lung. Whitman made his music signify. Rarely in the sweep of lines is the breath harshened and interrupted. The tension of Hopkins is nearer to activity. It is activity, muscular, violent, and formal. Emily Dickinson's strictness, sometimes almost a slang of strictness, speaks with an intellectually active, stimulated, quick music. But Whitman offers us the rhythms of resolved physical conflict when he says, "I have found the law of my own poems." He celebrates that victory.
Is there anything that you feel that the two of you have in common in your voices?
Well, only that that we're not afraid of talking about anything. And a lot of poets are not afraid of talking about anything. I think it's almost a necessity for a poet. But there are plenty of poets who hold back too. So she helped a lot of her students by her generous freedom. She's curiously not an extremely well-known poet, I think. However, for me, in all my growing up and my explorations of poetry, and particularly of poetry with real dash and clash, she has been right there, and I don't know if she's run out of customers, but she shouldn't.
Well, I loved your words for that, by the way. Clash and dash. I mean, energy. Her forthrightness, her originality, that clarity of, I think many of your favorite poems of hers are my favorite poems of hers as well. She was so well read, so well educated. She was so new, kind of like Allen Ginsberg, new, based on a basis of profound knowledge of a lot of poetry. I love in your poem, Jubilate Anya, where you talk about her voice, its resonance, its musicality, her big head, her kind of heroic stance. She was very confident, too. I mean, I liked in her that she was confident. She wasn't a muley-puley kind of person. She was out there. Had her doubts, like we all do, but she had, I don't know if it was just courage or confidence.
Last to the podium went Muriel Rukeyser, a poet who once wrote her own Smartian vow, never to despise in myself what I have been taught to despise, and never to despise the other, and concluded her ode to cockroaches so. I reach, I touch, I begin to know you. Muriel was soaring now. She was in full song, and the faces in the nave were all lifted up as one, amazed, all of them, by her huge head, her heart-shaped face, her ferocious beauty, and her voice lovely and growly at its edges. For I have a providential acquaintance with men who bear the names of animals, and everyone who was there was with her in the little church, swelled with light. Indeed, the podium itself seemed to be attempting to raise itself up. For I bless God for Mr. Lion, Mr. Cock, Mr. Cat, Mr. Talbot, Mr. Hart, Mrs. Fish, Mr. Grub, and Miss Lamb. And now it became evident that our podium was not rising at all. It was Muriel who was sinking, toppling, in fact, hauling down upon herself the microphone and the amplifier and all their thick wiring into a heap on the floor. From under this wreckage, her suddenly reclarioned voice was heard. Let Zadok worship with the mole. Before honor is humility. And as we disentangled her, she scanned about and said, She that looketh low shall learn. But suddenly a young woman rushed out the door, shouting, I'm calling an ambulance. Muriel called after her, No ambulance, I need a chair, a chair. A plump man came swiftly wriggling himself through the audience. I'm a doctor, a doctor. No doctors, Muriel shouted even louder. A chair, a chair. Eased into a chair at last, she smiled. Let Carpus rejoice with the frogfish. A woman cannot die on her knees. For all those who were there at the Church of the Transfiguration that evening in 1978, and for those who may have heard about it later, and those of you coming upon it now for the first time, and for Kit Smart, who died in debtor's prison in 1771 at 49, and for Muriel, who would die 2 years after that evening, and for these witnesses who are also gone, Paul and Etheridge and Jane and Joel and Alan and Grace and David and James and Joel, and the carrier pigeon too, and for the rest of us still standing or sitting and soon to topple, let all of us rejoice and be made glad.